I adjusted my backpack straps and stepped onto the familiar dirt path leading into the woods. The morning air carried that distinct autumn chill, the kind that makes your nose tingle and your cheeks flush. These morning walks had become my ritual over the past few years, a quiet rebellion against the predictability of my life back home. Arthur was probably settling into his armchair right now, coffee in one hand, newspaper in the other. He'd given up asking to join me years ago, not that he'd ever shown much genuine interest. "Be careful out there," he'd mumbled from behind his morning paper, the same words he always used, more habit than concern. The trail curved ahead, winding between towering maples and oaks. Their leaves had started their seasonal transformation, painting the canopy in strokes of amber and crimson. My boots crunched over fallen leaves, a sound that always reminded me of how alive everything felt out here, even in decay. I stopped at my favorite spot, a fallen log beside a small stream. The water's gentle murmur mixed with birdsong created nature's symphony, so different from the silence that filled our house these days. I pulled out my thermos of tea and took a slow sip, letting the warmth spread through my chest. A chickadee landed on a branch nearby, tilting its head as if curious about this regular intruder into its domain. I smiled, remembering how I'd tried to share these moments with Arthur once. He'd complained about the mosquitoes, checked his phone repeatedly, and asked every 15 minutes when we'd head back. That was 5 years ago, and I'd stopped asking him to come along after that. Out here, among the trees and wildlife, I didn't have to be anyone's wife or maintain the proper appearance of a Langston family member. The forest didn't care about social obligations or carefully maintained routines. It just was, and so was I. Just Clara, breathing in the earthy scent of moss and pine, feeling more myself than I ever did within those four walls I called home. I was nearing that old bend, the one where the trees seemed to stretch a little taller, where the air always carried a coolness, no matter the season. My steps slowed, out of habit I think. It had become a signal for me, a place to pause, to breathe in deeper. Today, though, something was different. A shape, a figure, standing where the light broke through the branches, casting odd shadows I wasn't used to seeing. He stood there, leaning against the sturdy trunk of an oak, blending seamlessly into the landscape as if he belonged. His eyes met mine first, steady, not intrusive, just observing. He remained still, but something inside me shifted, my heart, perhaps. I felt a sudden flutter of familiarity in my chest, despite knowing I had never seen him before. There was nothing menacing about him. If anything, his tranquility drew me in. With broad shoulders, dark skin, and a relaxed posture, he seemed to know the forest as intimately as I did. It felt like it was his refuge too. I faltered, hesitant, feeling out of place on the very path I'd walked hundreds of times. But his eyes stayed on me, not in a way that made me want to flee, though my instincts told me something was different now. Certainly, something had shifted. I don't know why I felt that strange pull, the way my body seemed to lean forward by itself, a silent invitation. Maybe it was the familiarity of the unknown that drew me in. It was rare these days, that feeling, the newness of something in a life where everything seemed pre-scripted, predictable. Yet there he was, and something deep inside me stirred, the dust swept from old corners I hadn't bothered to peek into for years. I barely registered him as he straightened, a warm smile breaking over his face like dawn pushing through night. "Didn't expect to see anyone out here," he said, voice low and textured, an easy mix with the hum of the forest. There was ease but not laziness to the way his brow didn't wrinkle when he said it, like this felt more like conversation than surprise. I swallowed, a part of me suddenly very aware of my age, of my silver-streaked hair pulled into a practical ponytail, this old fleece jacket I wore nearly threadbare. But the usual self-consciousness didn't have room to bloom because I was focused on something else. That voice, the way the low tones settled over me, grounding me in a single moment more than I'd felt in ages. I nodded, managing a small smile, my throat dry, but my body warm. "Not many people come this way," I replied, my voice softer than usual, like it didn't want to break the spell either of us seemed to be under. He introduced himself, Michael. The name teetered on my lips for a second, before lodging itself somewhere in my brain, like it belonged there, even though we were strangers. The syllables sounded right. too right for a man I'd just laid eyes on, standing in a place that was supposed to be mine alone. We stood there for a moment more, the silence not quite tense but charged, like the air made space for whatever came next between us. The leaves rustled overhead, a soft shuffling in the distance as some animal mindlessly went about its business. Time didn't seem to move the same here anymore. "You walk this way often?" he asked, voice cut with curiosity. No presumption, just a simple statement, like it might be the most natural thing in the world for him to be here, talking with me, out in the middle of nowhere. I nodded again, and before I realized it, the words tumbled from me. "Every day. It's quiet, peaceful." I surprised myself, maybe because Arthur still hadn't asked once in all these years, or maybe because no one bothered looking that deeply into something so mundane as walking the woods. Suddenly, I wanted this stranger, Michael, to know exactly what this walk meant to me. His eyes flickered with something like understanding, an acknowledgement beneath the surface. We fell into step, somehow without thinking about it. I didn't exactly agree to it. It just happened. His shoulder brushed mine lightly as we started walking, and I thought about stepping away to make more room, but I didn't. I liked how near he was, close but not overbearing. The conversation meandered along like the trail underneath us, natural, unhurried. We talked about how long the trail had been here, decades, longer maybe, how the light changed through the trees depending on the time of day. It seemed too trivial to discuss, but at the same time, nothing else felt as important as these details being spoken aloud between us. "When it rains, the moss practically glows," I said without thinking. I could feel the weight of his eyes resting on me when I looked at him out of the corner of my eye. The skin on the side of my neck tingled where I imagined his gaze followed. "You point that out to many people?" His voice felt close suddenly. No extra weight to it, but the tone was laden with something, unstated, something I didn't quite have a name for yet. My throat tightened. Oh. A quiet honesty I hadn't planned on, but it felt good. The truth cutting a path through the usual small talk I'd been drowning in for years. And Michael just listened. His broad features remained unchanged, yet I felt like he'd heard something in my voice that was more than the words I said. The forest around us blurred into the background as our pace synchronized. The awareness of him beside me became as much part of the walk as the trail underfoot. Every so often, our arms brushed, just faintly. Every time it happened, it unlocked something I hadn't realized was locked. A door maybe, a window. All I knew was that it wasn't just physical. That slight connection of skin against fabric, it made me feel awake in a way I was completely unfamiliar with anymore. But God, the simple act of walking next to this stranger, of hearing his voice, of the woods around us settling comfortably into quiet the longer we spoke, it stirred something. I tried to ignore it, to rationalize it. Just a nice conversation on a nice day with a nice person, a person I could trust, a person I could feel, a person I could lie to myself. I wasn't some naive girl. I knew what I was feeling. I knew what I was feeling inside when I knew what I was feeling when I woke up the next morning. I wasn't a simple act of will. I knew what I was feeling. I knew what I was feeling. Michael, though, he just walked with me. As we entered the clearing, shafts of autumn sunlight pierced through the canopy, creating a golden halo around us. The air felt different here, warmer, more intimate. My steps slowed naturally, matching Michael's pace, until we both came to a stop. I've walked this path hundreds of times, but I'd never noticed how perfect the spot was. The trees formed a natural circle around us, their leaves creating a kaleidoscope of amber and crimson above. The usual forest sounds seemed to fade away, leaving just the gentle rustle of leaves in the breeze. Michael turned to face me. The sunlight caught the silver strands in his dark hair, and his eyes held mine with an intensity that made my breath catch. Time seemed to stretch between us, and I felt exposed under his gaze, not uncomfortably so, but as if he could see past all my carefully constructed layers. "You're different," he murmured, his voice carrying a warmth that made my skin tingle. The admiration in his tone struck something deep within me, something that had been dormant for longer than I cared to admit. My heart thundered in my chest, The walls I'd built over years of routine and compromise began to crack. These were the walls that kept me safe, that helped me navigate my predictable life with Arthur, that maintained the careful distance I'd created between myself and any real emotional risk. But here, in this sun-dappled clearing with a stranger who somehow didn't feel like a stranger at all, those walls felt paper-thin. I couldn't remember the last time someone had looked at me like this, really looked at me, as if they were seeing something valuable, something worth discovering. Not as Arthur's wife, not as the woman who took solitary walks in the woods, but as myself, raw and real and unguarded. My fingers trembled slightly as I adjusted my hair, a nervous habit I thought I'd outgrown. The forest around us held its breath, waiting. A gentle breeze rustled through the clearing, carrying with it the earthy scent of fallen leaves. I struggled to find the right words, my usual eloquence lost in the intensity of Michael's gaze. The sunlight, filtering through the canopy, cast dappled shadows across his face, highlighting the depth in his eyes as they studied mine. My heart skipped when his hand moved toward my face. His fingers delicately swept aside a wayward strand of hair that had fallen across my cheek. The touch was feather-light, yet it sent electricity coursing through my entire body. His hand lingered near my face, the warmth of his skin radiating just inches from mine. Time seemed to slow. The forest around us grew quiet, or maybe I just couldn't hear anything over the thundering of my pulse in my ears. A voice in the back of my mind whispered warnings about boundaries and commitments, but it grew fainter with each passing second. The magnetic pull between us was undeniable. I found myself swaying slightly closer to him, drawn by an invisible force I didn't want to resist. The space between us shrank, charged with unspoken possibility. My breath caught in my throat as his fingers traced the outline of my jaw, barely touching, but leaving trails of fire in their wake. The familiar weight of my wedding ring felt heavy on my finger, yet I couldn't bring myself to pull away. Something long dormant had awakened inside me, something wild and wanting that had nothing to do with the careful, controlled life I'd built. My carefully constructed walls were crumbling, and I was letting them fall. His touch felt like coming home to a place I'd never been. The rational part of my brain knew this was dangerous territory, knew we were stepping over a line that couldn't be uncrossed, but in that moment, with the sunlight warming my skin and Michael's gentle touch sending shivers down my spine, I couldn't bring myself to care. I gasped softly as Michael closed the distance between us. The first brush of his lips against mine was gentle, almost tentative. My heart pounded against my chest as a flood of sensations washed over me. The warmth of his breath, the subtle scent of pine and earth that clung to his clothes, the strength in his hands as they found their way to my waist. I couldn't remember the last time I'd been kissed like this. The careful restraint in his touch unraveled something deep inside me. My fingers curled into the fabric of his shirt, pulling him closer as the kiss deepened. The forest around us seemed to fade away, leaving only the thundering of my pulse in my ears and the electric current running through my body wherever we touched. His hand slid up to cradle the back of my neck, fingers threading through my hair. I melted against him, letting out a small sound that surprised even me. The passion that had been dormant for so long roared to life, making my knees weak. Michael steadied me, his arm tightening around my waist as his mouth moved against mine with increasing urgency. The kiss seemed to last forever, and end too soon all at once. When we finally broke apart, I was breathing heavily, my lips tingling, my entire body hummed with an energy I'd forgotten I could feel. Through my daze, I noticed Michael's chest rising and falling rapidly too, his eyes darker than before as they searched my face. In this clearing, wrapped in dappled sunlight and Michael's embrace, I felt more awake and alive than I had in years. The spark I thought had died long ago hadn't just been rekindled, it had erupted into a flame. I hadn't felt this alive in so long, like a fire was being lit inside me for the first time in years. He came closer again. His lips moved with a hunger that matched the growing pulse in my chest, electricity sweeping through every part of me, plunging me into the heat of the moment without hesitation. I melted into him, my fingers tangling in his jacket, grasping, pulling, giving in to the pull that felt almost instinctual. The air felt thick around us, full of an energy neither of us questioned, and that made it impossible to stop. His fingers trailed down my back with a kind of urgency, and I could feel his breath quicken against my ear as our kiss deepened. There were no words between us then, no space for any doubt or hesitation. I slid my hand up around his neck, anchoring myself closer against his body, every nerve alive, every barrier I'd held onto slowly crumbling. The forest remained our only witness, its trees a tall, quiet cocoon, guarding us from the outside world. Time felt different here, slower somehow. Or maybe it was that I was moving faster than I'd ever allowed myself to go. This dance was something I haven't done in decades. I didn't think about Arthur, or the life waiting for me beyond this clearing, beyond these woods. It was like everything that had seemed so solid, so fixed, had simply become background noise, fading into the distance. We moved together then, no hesitation, no second thoughts. Everything about this moment felt careful and reckless at the same time. A kind of wild, unspoken understanding passed between us, both of us swept up in something bigger than either of us had expected. Right then, hidden under the canopy of leaves, I let it all happen, every part of me surrendering fully, as though I'd been here all along, craving this without knowing. Light filtered through the canopy, casting dappled shadows that danced across our entwined bodies. My head rested against Michael's chest, rising and falling with each breath. The forest floor beneath us was surprisingly soft, cushioned by years of fallen leaves. His fingers traced lazy patterns on my shoulder, sending pleasant shivers down my spine. I closed my eyes, drinking in the peaceful aftermath. The woods had always been my sanctuary, but now they held a different kind of magic. The air was thick with the scent of earth and pine, mixed with the lingering musk of our passion. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves above, nature's own lullaby. The sun's angle had shifted, its golden light now slanting through the trees. As the warmth on my skin began to fade, reality started seeping back in. Thoughts of home, of Arthur sitting in his favorite armchair with his newspaper, crept into my mind. My wedding ring felt heavy against my chest where my hand rested. Arthur had never understood my need for these woodland walks. "What's the point?" he'd always say, preferring the predictability of his golf course to the wild beauty of the forest. Now I'd found someone who not only understood, but shared that connection with nature. Yet that very thought sent a stab of guilt through my chest. I pushed the feeling away, focusing instead on Michael's warmth beside me, the way his heart beat steady and strong under my ear. The memory of his hands on my body, the intensity in his eyes when he looked at me, these were too precious to taint with regret. At least not yet. The clearing had become our own private universe, separate from the complications of the outside world. I wasn't ready to let that go, not while the afterglow still tingled through my body, not while I could still taste him on my lips. The leaves crunched under my feet as I made my way home, my heart still racing from what had happened in the clearing. My clothes felt askew, twigs and debris caught in my hair, but I couldn't stop smiling. Every sensation felt heightened, the crisp autumn air on my skin, the golden late afternoon light filtering through the trees. Back home, I showered and went about my routine. Arthur barely looked up from his newspaper when I entered, asking if I'd had a nice walk. I muttered something non-committal and escaped to the kitchen. A week passed. Then another. The memory of that afternoon remained vivid, but something felt off. At first I ignored the slight burning sensation and occasional itching. Must be from all the yard work, I told myself. But when small blisters appeared, panic set in. I scheduled an appointment with my doctor, making up an excuse to Arthur about a routine checkup. The sterile smell of the examination room made my stomach churn as I described my symptoms, carefully omitting any mention of Michael or that afternoon in the woods. Dr. Chen's face remained neutral as she examined me, but her words hit like a physical blow. "Clara, these are classic symptoms of genital herpes." The rest of her explanation faded into white noise. Words like incurable, unmanageable floated past me. She handed me a prescription for antiviral medication, along with some pamphlets about living with HSV-2. In my car, I sat staring at the steering wheel, the papers crumpled in my lap. The parking lot blurred through my tears. My mind raced through the implications. This wasn't just a moment of passion I could lock away in my memories. This was permanent, a physical reminder etched into my body. The weight of secrecy pressed down on me. I couldn't tell Arthur. It would destroy our marriage. I couldn't reach Michael. I didn't even know his last name. The forest path that had always been my sanctuary now felt tainted, marked by my shame. At home, I hid the medication behind old toiletries under the bathroom sink. Each night, I waited until Arthur was asleep before applying the cream, feeling like a thief in my own home. The pamphlets went through the shredder at work, where no one would find them. My daily walks became shorter. I avoided the clearing where it happened, taking different paths that felt safer, more anonymous. Sometimes I caught myself touching my wedding ring, twisting it around my finger, a nervous habit I'd developed since the diagnosis. The gold band that had once felt comfortable now seemed to burn against my skin, a constant reminder of my betrayal and its consequences. My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. Alice's name flashed across the screen and my stomach dropped before I even answered. A mother's intuition, maybe. "Mom?" Her voice cracked. I gripped the counter's edge, my knuckles turning white. Something was wrong. "Can you come over, please?" I found Alice on her front porch, her face streaked with tears. She pulled me into a crushing hug the moment I stepped out of my car. My heart hammered against my ribs as she led me inside. The house was unnaturally quiet. Through the living room window, I spotted Tom in the backyard, pacing back and forth with his phone pressed to his ear. His free hand kept running through his hair, a nervous habit I'd noticed over the years. "It's Jake," Alice choked out, sinking into the couch. "We took him to the doctor yesterday because of some sores." She covered her face with her hands. "They tested him. It's herpes." The room spun, my legs went weak, and I barely made it to the armchair before collapsing. The same diagnosis. My grandson. My stomach churned as the implications crashed over me like a tidal wave. "Tom and I." Alice's voice dropped to a whisper. "We've been fighting all night. He thinks I must have... that I... Oh, fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "But I haven't. I would never. And then I accused him and he... Oh." She gestured helplessly toward the backyard. Tom stormed in through the back door, his face red with anger. "I told you, Alice, I've never been with anyone else. Never." "Then explain it." Alice shot up from the couch. "Explain how our son got this." I sat, frozen, watching my daughter's marriage fracture before my eyes. My wedding ring felt like it was burning against my skin. I could stop this. I should stop this. But the words stuck in my throat, choking me with shame. "I've called my sister," Tom said, his voice strained. "She's letting me stay with her for a few days until we figure this out." "Running away? Perfect." Alice's laugh was bitter, nothing like her usual warm chuckle. "What do you want me to do? Stay here while you keep accusing me of something I didn't do?" My hands trembled in my lap. I pressed them together, trying to steady them as my daughter and son-in-law tore into each other. Each accusation felt like a knife in my chest. This was my fault. All of it. "Mom?" Alice turned to me, her eyes pleading. "Say something. Please." I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. The truth sat heavy on my tongue, threatening to spill out, but I couldn't. I couldn't bear to see the look in her eyes if she knew. Couldn't face destroying not only my own marriage but my daughter's image of me forever. So I sat there, silent and cowardly, as Tom grabbed his keys and walked out the front door. Alice crumpled onto the couch, sobbing, while I patted her back with shaking hands. Each tear she shed was because of me, and I couldn't even give her the truth she deserved. I sat in my living room, staring at my phone as another barrage of texts from Alice came through. My heart sank with each notification. The screen lit up with messages full of anger and pain, accusations against Tom, plans to contact divorce lawyers, concerns about Jake's well-being. My fingers hovered over the keypad, but what could I possibly say? The phone rang. Alice's name flashed on the screen. My hand trembled as I answered. "Mom, I can't believe he's still denying it. We had another huge fight last night. Jake heard everything." Tears welled up in my eyes as I listened to my daughter's voice crack with emotion. The weight of knowing I was responsible for their pain crushed my chest. Tom swears he never cheated. How else could this have happened? Jake's only 8. Mum, 8. And now he has this condition forever. I twisted my wedding ring, a nervous habit that had grown worse since that day in the forest. Sweetheart, maybe you should take some time to... Take time? Everyone's talking about it. Aunt Sarah called yesterday asking if the rumors were true. Even Dad knows something's wrong. He said Tom seemed really upset at Sunday dinner. The mention of Arthur made my stomach lurch. He'd been watching me closely lately, probably sensing my distraction and anxiety. And you know what's worse? Tom's mother had the nerve to suggest maybe I was the one who cheated. Can you believe that? As if I would ever. Each word from Alice felt like a dagger. I walked to the window, needing air. The forest loomed in the distance, a reminder of my betrayal. The trees that once brought me peace now seemed to mock me with their secrets. I've already talked to a lawyer, Mum. I'm meeting with her next week. I can't stay married to someone who would do this to our family. My hand pressed against the cool glass. Alice, please, think about the children, about Jake and Emily. That's exactly what I'm thinking about. How can I trust Tom around them after this? He's destroyed everything. But it wasn't Tom. It was me. I was the one who had destroyed everything. My moment of weakness in that clearing had set off a chain reaction that was tearing my family apart. My grandson would live with this forever, and my daughter's marriage was crumbling, all because I couldn't resist a stranger's touch. The sound of Alice crying brought me back to the present. Tom keeps saying we need marriage counselling, but how can I even look at him anymore? Every time I see Jake's medication, every doctor's appointment, I just get so angry. I sank into the nearest chair, my legs no longer able to support me. The urge to confess overwhelmed me, but fear kept the words locked in my throat. How could I tell my daughter that her own mother had caused this pain? The whole family's falling apart, Mum. Emily asked me yesterday why Daddy was sleeping in the guest room. Jake's withdrawn and angry. And Tom? He looks defeated. But he brought this on himself. No, he didn't. Every accusation against Tom was meant for me. Every tear Alice shed was because of my actions. Every moment of pain Jake experienced was my fault. The truth sat like poison in my mouth, but I swallowed it back down. My silence was another betrayal, but I couldn't bear to see the look in Alice's eyes if she knew. I couldn't face destroying what remained of our family. I just don't know what to do anymore, Mum, Alice whispered. Neither did I, and that truth terrified me more than anything. I sit at my kitchen table, staring at the untouched cup of tea growing cold. The sound of raised voices from the living room pierces through the walls. Alice and Tom are at it again, their argument reaching new heights. Arthur shifts uncomfortably in his chair, pretending to read the newspaper. My stomach churns as I hear Jake crying upstairs. He's too young to understand what's happening, but children always know when something's wrong. I twist my wedding ring, the metal warm from my constant fidgeting. I want a divorce, Alice's voice cracks. I can't believe you do this to our family. For the last time, I've never cheated on you. Tom's desperation is palpable. I don't know how Jake got it, but it wasn't from me. I feel the walls closing in. Each accusation they hurl at each other is another knife in my gut. My hands shake as I grip the edge of the table. Then explain it to me, Tom. Explain how our 6-year-old son got herpes. These things don't just appear out of nowhere. Arthur lowers his newspaper, his face etched with concern. The word divorce echoes in my head. Over and over, I think about Jake, about Alice and Tom's marriage crumbling because of me. The weight of my secret crushes my chest. Stop. My voice comes out as a whisper at first. Then louder. Stop. I push back from the table, the chair scraping against the floor. My legs carry me to the living room where Alice stands with tears streaming down her face, Tom's hands raised in frustrated defense. It wasn't Tom. The words tumble out before I can stop them. My heart pounds so hard I can barely hear my own voice. It was me. I'm the one who gave it to Jake. The room goes dead silent. Even Jake's crying upstairs seems to pause. Alice stares at me, her mouth slightly open. Tom's hands slowly lowered to his sides. What? Alice's voice is barely audible. I got herpes. Oh, my throat constricts. A few months ago. I must have passed it to Jake when I was watching him. Maybe when I kissed him goodnight or shared a drink. Arthur appears in the doorway behind me. I can't bring myself to look at him. Mum, what are you talking about? Alice's voice trembles. How did you? There was a man in the woods. A confession. Burns my throat during one of my morning walks. It just happened, and I didn't know I had it until later. I didn't tell anyone. I couldn't. I finally look up at my daughter's face. The shock and betrayal in her eyes makes me want to disappear into the floor. Tom stands frozen, his earlier anger replaced by disbelief. The silence stretches, heavy and suffocating. Arthur's newspaper drops to the floor with a soft thud. I stood there, my confession hanging in the air like a toxic cloud. The silence that followed was deafening. Alice's face transformed before my eyes. The anger she'd directed at Tom morphed into something worse, something I'd never seen in my daughter's eyes before. You? Alice's voice cracked. You did this to my son? To my family? She backed away from me, bumping into the kitchen counter. Her hands gripped the edge until her knuckles turned white. Arthur sat at the dining table perfectly still. His face had drained of all colour. In 30 years of marriage, I'd never seen him look so pale, so rigid. The newspaper he'd been pretending to read during our earlier discussion lay forgotten. I didn't mean to. My voice sounded weak, pathetic even to my own ears. Didn't mean to. Alice's voice rose sharply. You cheated on Dad in the woods. Like some... She couldn't even finish the sentence. And then you let me blame Tom? You sat there and watched me talk about divorce while knowing the truth? What will people think? Tom stood by the doorway, his expression unreadable, the accusations he'd faced, the strain on his marriage, all because of my silence. I trusted you, Alice continued, tears streaming down her face. I came to you for advice, for support, and you just sat there, listening to me fall apart, knowing you caused all of this. Arthur's chair scraped against the floor as he stood up. His movements were mechanical, deliberate. In the woods. His voice was dangerously quiet. All those morning walks. Arthur, please. Don't. He held up his hand. The gesture was so final, so dismissive. You've made a fool of me, of our entire family. Alice grabbed her purse from the counter. I can't even look at you right now. My son Jake is suffering because of you. Do you understand that? He's 6 years old, Mum. 6. The weight of their words crushed me. I reached for Alice, but she recoiled. Don't touch me. Don't call me. Don't come near my children. Her voice shook with rage and betrayal. How could you do this to us, to Dad, to our family? Tom finally spoke up. All those weeks of accusations, of sleeping on the couch, of being treated like a cheater, he shook his head. I defended myself to everyone, our friends, our families, and it was you, all along. I was scared, I whispered. I didn't know how to tell you. Scared. Arthur's voice cut through the room like ice. You weren't too scared to destroy everything we built. 30 years of marriage, and this is how you repay my trust. The family photos on the wall seemed to mock me now, smiling faces captured in happier times, moments that felt like they belonged to someone else's life. Arthur walked past me without a second glance, heading upstairs. Each heavy footstep felt like another nail in the coffin of our marriage. Alice gathered her things, tears still flowing. You're not the mother I thought I knew. I don't even recognize you anymore. She turned to Tom. Let's go home. We need to figure out how to tell Jake's doctor about this. They left without looking back, the front door closing with a finality that echoed through the empty house. I stood alone in the kitchen, surrounded by the wreckage of my choices. The sound of Arthur moving around upstairs, opening and closing drawers, told me everything I needed to know about what would come next. I sit alone in the kitchen, staring at the empty chair where Arthur usually reads his morning paper. The house feels cavernous now, filled with echoing silence where there used to be life. My phone lies dead on the counter. I stopped charging it after the 20th time Alice sent my call straight to voicemail. Yesterday, a thick envelope arrived from Arthur's lawyer. I recognized the firm's letterhead before I even opened it. The divorce papers felt heavy in my hands, each page a testament to 30 years crumbling away. Arthur didn't even have the courage to serve them himself. He's been staying at his sister's house for the past week, only coming home when he knows I'm out to collect more of his things. I tried visiting Alice's house last weekend. Tom saw me through the window and quickly drew the curtains. Through the fabric I could make out his silhouette, shepherding the kids upstairs. My own grandson Jake, who used to run into my arms every time I visited, now being hurried away from his grandmother like I'm some kind of monster. Alice made her position crystal clear in her last text message. Don't come to the house again. The kids don't need this confusion in their lives. You've done enough damage. The family photos on the walls mock me now. Thanksgiving dinners, Christmas mornings, birthday parties, moments frozen in time when we were whole. Last week, I got an email from my sister-in-law about the upcoming family reunion. The message was brief. Clara, given the circumstances, we think it's best if you don't attend this year. I walk through the rooms of our house, my house now I suppose, touching familiar surfaces, remembering. The dining room where we hosted countless family dinners, the living room where I used to read stories to my grandchildren. Everything looks the same, but nothing feels right anymore. My wedding ring sits in a drawer upstairs. I couldn't bear to wear it after Arthur left, but I couldn't bring myself to get rid of it either. The worst part is the silence. No more unexpected visits from Alice dropping off the kids. No more family movie nights. No more Sunday dinners with Arthur grilling in the backyard. Just empty rooms filled with memories that feel more like accusations now. A birthday card I was planning to send to Jake still sits on my desk, unsigned. His party is next weekend. I won't be there to see him blow out the candles. I won't be there for any of their moments anymore. One afternoon in the woods cost me everything I spent a lifetime building. The morning light streams through the kitchen window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. The forest path beckons from beyond the backyard, but I haven't set foot there since that day. That path, once my sanctuary, now feels like a monument to my greatest mistake. The realtor's sign went up in the front yard yesterday. Arthur made it clear through his lawyer I need to be out by the end of the month. I fold my clothes mechanically, each sweater and blouse a memory I'm forced to compress into cardboard boxes. 30 years of life, reduced to what will fit in my Honda Civic. The house creaks around me. Familiar sounds that used to bring comfort now feel like accusations. My wedding ring sits heavy in a jewelry box. I couldn't bear to wear it anymore. The gold band that once symbolized forever now represents everything I destroyed. I drive aimlessly through town, past the grocery store where I used to bump into neighbors who chat about their families. Now they avert their eyes when they see me coming. The coffee shop where Alice and I had our weekly catch-ups stands like a monument to what I've lost. Jake's elementary school, where I used to pick him up on Thursdays, makes my chest tight with grief. Motel on the outskirts of town becomes my temporary home. The room smells of old cigarettes and cheap air freshener. The bedspread is thin and scratchy against my skin. At night, the neon sign outside my window bathes everything in a sickly red glow. I lay in the dark, listening to the ice machine down the hall and the occasional sound of cars on the highway. My phone sits silent, no messages, no calls. The last time I saw Alice, she wouldn't even look at me. Tom shepherded Jake away quickly, as if I were contagious. The memory of Jake's confused face as he was pulled away from his grandmother haunts me. The woods are visible from my motel window, a dark line of trees against the horizon. I used to find such peace there, such connection to something larger than myself. Now those same trees mock me with their permanence, while my life has become so transient. The clearing where I met Michael feels like a fever dream. Was I really so desperate for connection that I risked everything? My fingers trace the rough wallpaper of the motel room. The pattern blurs as tears fill my eyes. I think about Arthur sleeping alone in our bed, about Alice trying to explain to Jake why he can't see his grandmother anymore, about the Sunday dinners that will go on without me, the birthdays I'll miss, the moments that will become memories I'm not part of. I catch my reflection in the streaky mirror above the dresser. I hardly recognize myself anymore. The woman who walked those forest paths seeking adventure seems like a stranger now. All I see is someone who destroyed everything she loved for a moment of reckless abandon. I wake up in my small apartment. the silence pressing against my ears like a physical force. The morning light filters through curtains I don't recognize, casting unfamiliar shadows on walls that still feel temporary. 3 months have passed since I moved out of the house Arthur and I shared for 30 years. My morning routine has become mechanical. Coffee, toast, shower. Each action performed in a space that holds no memories, no echoes of laughter or family gatherings. The kitchen table seats 4, but I've never had a visitor. The extra chairs mock me with their emptiness. Sometimes I catch myself reaching for the phone to call Alice, my fingers hovering over her number before reality crashes back. The last time I saw Jake, he was clutching Tom's leg at the grocery store, hiding his face when I tried to wave. The pain of that moment still feels fresh, like a bruise that won't heal. I've started taking different routes through town, avoiding the places that remind me of my old life. The coffee shop where Alice and I used to meet for Saturday brunch, the park where Jake learned to ride his bike, the medical office where I received the diagnosis that unraveled everything. The woods beckon sometimes, especially on crisp mornings like this one. I find myself thinking about Michael, wondering if he still walks those paths, but the thought of returning there makes my stomach turn. Those trees witnessed my undoing, the moment when passion overrode judgment and set fire to everything I held dear. My new neighbors don't know my story. To them, I'm just the quiet woman in apartment 3B who keeps to herself. It's easier this way. No explanations needed, no judgmental glances, no whispered conversations that stop when I enter a room. I've learned to sit with the silence now. It's no longer my friend like it used to be, but we've reached an understanding. Some days I talk to myself just to hear a human voice. Other days I let the quiet wash over me, accepting it as my companion in this new life. The divorce papers sit in a drawer, finalized and filed. Arthur's signature, once so familiar, looks like a stranger's now. Our shared life reduced to legal terminology and property divisions. 30 years of marriage ended with the stroke of a pen. Every morning, I remove my wedding ring from its box and hold it, feeling its weight in my palm. I don't wear it anymore, but I can't bring myself to get rid of it. Like the family photos I kept. It's a relic of a life I destroyed for a moment of reckless abandon in a forest clearing. The worst part isn't the solitude, it's the knowledge that I earned it. Every empty chair at my table, every unanswered text, every celebration I'll miss, these are the consequences of my choices. The passion that seemed worth any price now feels like a fever dream, leaving me with nothing but regrets and memories that cut like glass. A year later, I stare at the phone on my kitchen counter, its screen dark and lifeless. The 20th voicemail I left for Alice last week remains unanswered, like all the others before it. The divorce papers from Arthur sit in a drawer, finalized and cold. My small apartment on Cedar Street feels more like a cell than a home, its walls closing in with each passing day. Walking through the woods yesterday, I found myself at that clearing again. The sunlight filtered through the leaves just like it did that day with Michael, but now it only casts shadows of what I've lost. The path that once brought me peace now haunts me with memories I can't shake. The local pub has become my new escape. The rusty barrel's dim lighting and constant chatter help drown out the silence. I sit at the corner of the bar, watching life happen around me. Young couples lean into each other, friends laugh over shared jokes, while I nurse my wine alone. Sometimes, younger men catch my eye. Their attention, however brief, fills a void. Alex, the bartender, caught my attention with his easy smile and gentle way of asking if I needed another drink. One night, after my 3rd glass of wine, I offered to sponsor his evening. He accepted with a casual shrug that made my heart ache. In his apartment, I pretended the warmth was real, that it meant something. But morning came harsh and bright, and his polite goodbye cut deeper than any silence. I keep going back, seeking that connection. Different faces, different names, but the same hollow feeling afterward. Each time I tell myself it'll be different, that this time it'll fill the emptiness inside. But it never does. The void just grows larger. My family photos remain packed away in boxes. I can't bear to look at them. Jake's birthday parties, family dinners, Christmas mornings, the apartment walls stay bare. Some nights I pick up the phone, thumb hovering over Alice's number, but I know there won't be an answer. Just more silence. The reflection in my bathroom mirror shows a stranger, Older, tired, lost. I've stopped wearing makeup most days. What's the point? The young men at the bar don't care, and there's no one else left to notice. Last night, sitting alone in my living room, I realized money can't buy the kind of love I had. These brief encounters with strangers are just band-aids on a wound that won't heal. The warmth of Arthur's morning kiss, Alice's spontaneous visits, Jake's tight hugs. Those moments were real. Now they're gone, shattered by one reckless choice.
Hey everyone, if you enjoyed the story, remember to like, subscribe and comment on the video for more stories like this. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss an update. If you have any similar stories to share, leave them in the comments and we'll make sure to bring them to life. Thanks for watching.